The dawn of April 7, 1945 painted Tokyo in a crimson haze. In the cockpit of his sleek Nakajima Ki-84 Hate fighter, Captain Masao Suenaga flexed his gloved hands, the familiar scent of oil and steel filling the cramped space. 20 miles west of the capital, at Chofu Airfield, the ground trembled under the distant thunder of engines, that deep, rhythmic growl he had come to dread. Another formation of American B-29 superfortresses was inbound from the south. Yet something about today's raid was wrong. Through the crackling static of his radio, frantic voices from ground control spoke of unknown aircraft, silver fighters approaching from the southeast. Suenaga frowned. The southeast? Impossible. No American fighter should be within 600 miles of Tokyo. The nearest Allied airfield lay on Saipan, far beyond the range of any escort plane he'd ever faced. At 28, Suenaga was already a seasoned squadron leader, hardened by 3 years of air combat. He had battled P-38 Lightnings in the Philippines, tangled with carrier-launched F-6F Hellcats, and even survived skirmishes with the powerful F-4U Corsairs near Okinawa. But all of those clashes occurred near enemy bases or fleets. Over Japan itself, the air had always belonged to them. Captain, emergency scramble. Sergeant Yamamoto, his ground crew chief, banged on the fuselage. Unknown fighters approaching Tokyo from the south. The words froze his blood. From the south? That would mean from beyond Iwo Jima, a staggering 600-plus miles away. No single-engine aircraft could cover such distance and still fight. Aerodynamically, it was unthinkable. The Hi-8's radial engine roared to life, coughing smoke. As Suenaga rolled toward the runway, he caught a glint of sunlight in the distance, a flash of silver, not the dark shapes of carrier-based Hellcats or Corsairs, but something alien. The urgent order came through his headset. All units, scramble immediately. Unidentified fighters over central Tokyo. The Ki-84 accelerated down the concrete strip, lifting into the morning air. Climbing toward 15,000 feet, Suenaga sensed unease from every transmission he heard. Ground control's voice trembled with panic. In all his years of combat, he had never heard fear like this. How did American fighters reach Tokyo? He wondered. What neither he nor any Japanese aviator yet realized was that they were about to face a revolution in aerial warfare, one that would annihilate every assumption about range, endurance, and dominance. The mysterious silver aircraft streaking toward Japan's capital would end an era. The dawn of the long-range P-51 Mustang had begun. To understand the disbelief that gripped Suenaga and his comrades, one must recall what every Japanese pilot knew in early 1945. Range always came at the cost of performance. More fuel meant heavier, slower planes. Long missions left fighters limping home, nearly empty. The famed Zero's extraordinary reach came from ruthless compromises. No armor, no self-sealing tanks, almost no protection. Its pilots called it a flying coffin, for a single bullet could turn it into a fireball. American fighters, by contrast, had always been the opposite. Tough, heavily armed, and short-legged. The squat P-47 Thunderbolt bristled with 8.50 caliber guns and could soak up tremendous punishment, yet it rarely flew more than 300 miles from base. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning stretched that range, but still depended on nearby airfields or carriers. That limitation had shielded Japan's home islands. As long as Allied fighters could not reach Tokyo, Japanese interceptors could focus solely on unescorted bombers. Every B-29 crewman crossing the coastline knew the truth. Once over Japan, they were utterly alone. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe of the Ki-61 Hien had based his entire strategy on that fact. The bombers come slow and fat, he told his wingman. Their fighters always turn back at the coast. That's when we strike. But at 6:47 a.m., as he climbed through 12,000 feet with 5 others, Watanabe saw something that shattered that certainty, a formation of glimmering silver planes diving toward the Nakajima Aircraft Works at Musashino. They weren't bombers, they were fighters, single-engine and confident, slashing across the sky, as if attacking from home base. "Control, this is Lightning 3, he radioed. "I count 15, no, 20 single-engine fighters over Musashino. Type unknown." His transmission unleashed chaos. Dozens of pilots reported the same impossible sight, American fighters operating freely above Tokyo, hundreds of miles from any known base. Captain Tamajiro Ogawa, a veteran ace with 25 victories, closed on the strangers and felt a chill. Their sleek shapes gleamed with smooth, deliberate design. long noses, elliptical wings like a Spitfire's, but more aggressive. Beneath each wing hung large external tanks, yet the aircraft maneuvered as if they were full of fuel and confidence. Impossible, Ogawa whispered. Those tanks should be empty. He could not know that he was witnessing the union of American industry and British engineering, the P-51 Mustang powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. These machines had flown nearly 700 miles from Iwo Jima, fought fiercely, and still carried fuel for the return trip. With 184 gallons internally, plus two 108-gallon drop tanks, the Mustang's efficient V-1650 Merlin made the unthinkable real, a combat radius of more than 850 miles. Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, diving his Ki-84 into the fray, felt his world collapse. If they can reach Tokyo, he thought, nowhere is safe. Meanwhile, leading the American formation was Major Robert W. Moore of the 15th Fighter Group. Spotting Ogawa's hate climbing toward the bomber stream, Moore banked to intercept. But instead of fighting cautiously, conserving fuel, the Mustangs attacked with reckless assurance. Moore's P-51D, still heavy with 200 gallons after the 700-mile trip, roared into a power dive. Its Packard-built Merlin engine unleashed nearly 1,700 horsepower, pushing the aircraft past 400 miles per hour. Ogawa broke left and dove, expecting the usual defensive dance of a fuel-starved intruder. But Moore stayed glued to his tail, his fighter moving with the ferocity of one launched from a base just minutes away. Across the sky, Japanese pilots felt the same shock. The Mustangs weren't merely surviving, they were hunting. At 6:58 a.m., the battle over Musashino erupted in full. Captain Suinaga's guns flamed first, streaks of orange fire chasing the Silver Phantom before him. The Mustang answered with 6.50 caliber Brownings, each spitting 850 rounds a minute. Both planes screamed past each other in a blur of tracers. Normally, an American fighter would have broken away to save fuel, but Moore immediately reversed into a steep, climbing turn. Suinaga, straining under 5 GS, gasped into his radio, "How much fuel do these aircraft carry?" He could not know that the Mustang had launched with nearly 400 gallons, more than twice his own capacity, and still had enough for an hour of brutal combat and the long voyage home. Elsewhere, Watanabe fought two Mustangs at once. "Control," he cried. "They're not turning back. They're not conserving fuel. How is this possible?" Major John B. Hampshire of the 506th Fighter Group answered the question over open comms, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. "They don't understand, do they? We can stay and fight. We can stay and hunt. We can reach anywhere in their empire and still make it home." Those words marked the psychological collapse of Japan's air defense. The sacred boundary, that invisible coastal line protecting the homeland, had vanished. When Watanabe's Hien took heavy fire, he tried to outlast his opponent, assuming the Americans must soon run dry. Instead, Hampshire closed in for the kill, his Mustang's guns shredding the Kawasaki's engine. As Watanabe's plane plunged in flames, his final transmission echoed across Tokyo's radio network. "They're not leaving, they're not running out of fuel. How do they get here?" At the same time, over the burning Nakajima plant, Captain Ogawa dueled with Moore in a 3-minute aerial ballet, an eternity in air combat. The Ki-84 was theoretically superior in climb and turn, but theory meant nothing against the Mustang's mix of power and stamina. Moore sacrificed altitude for speed, diving from 15,000 to 8,000 feet in a maneuver that would horrify any long-range pilot, but he had fuel to burn. In that dive, the war in the air over Japan truly changed. Ogawa realized too late that he had been drawn into a trap. The P-51's high-speed agility and aerodynamic grace gave Moore the advantage in every dive and climb. The Mustang could afford to fight aggressively, its tanks still heavy with fuel, while Ogawa had to guard every drop for the return to base. At 8,000 feet, Moore pulled into a tight climbing turn, his 6 machine guns blazing in perfect unison. The concentrated burst ripped through the left wing of Ogawa's Hate, igniting its fuel tank. As his aircraft spiraled earthward, Ogawa's final thought captured the moment Japan lost the sky. "If they can fly this far and fight this long, then we have already lost the war." At 7:14 a.m., barely 16 minutes after the first shots, the engagement was over. 7 Japanese fighters were destroyed. 2 Mustangs were damaged, but both limped back to Iwo Jima, completing a 1,350-mile round trip that should have been impossible for a single-engine plane. As the silver fighters regrouped and headed home with hours of fuel remaining, confusion reigned on Japanese radio channels. "Are they withdrawing to their carriers?" a controller demanded. Another replied in disbelief, "There are no carriers within 500 miles. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few survivors, would later write in his diary, "Today I saw the future of air warfare, and it terrifies me. The Americans can reach anywhere in our empire and still have fuel to hunt. Distance no longer protects us." That April morning marked the birth of a new reality. The P-51 Mustang's arrival over Tokyo ended Japan's last advantage, geography. Captain Masao Suinaga never returned from that mission. Weeks later, farmers found his crashed hay in a rice field outside the capital, its tanks dry, a single .50 caliber bullet through his heart. His death became a symbol of a nation's reckoning. Within days, the Imperial Japanese Air Force began rewriting its entire strategy. For years, Japanese pilots had relied on distance as their greatest ally. Now that sanctuary had vanished. The P-51D Mustang, with its extended range of roughly 1,650 miles, could escort bombers or conduct deep strike missions anywhere within Japan's empire and still return safely to Iwo Jima. The numbers told the story. Between April 7th and Japan's surrender in mid-August 1945, American Mustang units flew over 50 very long-range missions, each covering an average of 1,350 miles. In just 4 months, they destroyed more than 340 Japanese aircraft for the loss of only 62 of their own. But statistics only hinted at the deeper impact. The real damage was psychological. Morale among Japanese pilots, once fierce and unyielding, collapsed almost overnight. Veteran Ace Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki later confessed, "After April 1945, we stopped believing we could win. If Americans could send fighters from Iwo Jima to Tokyo with fuel to spare, what else could they do? Where could we hide?" The Mustang had achieved more than tactical victory. It had revolutionized strategy itself. Combining the Rolls-Royce Merlin's unmatched fuel efficiency with North American aviation's aerodynamic brilliance, the P-51 turned the traditional logic of air combat on its head. No longer did long range mean sluggish performance. No longer did endurance require vulnerability. The impossible balance, speed, firepower, and vast reach had been realized. For Japan's airmen, that transformation was devastating. For 3 years, they had exploited the limitations of Allied fighters, striking bombers only after their escorts turned back. Now they were the hunted, unable to retreat, confronted by enemies who could appear anywhere, fight relentlessly, and vanish into the distance. Captain Tamajiro Ogawa's final transmission before his Hague plunged into Tokyo Bay summed up this new truth: "If they can come this far, we have already lost." He was right. The long reach of the Mustang did not merely win battles, it shattered Japan's faith in the defensive power of distance. Factories that once lay beyond the threat of attack now burned under precision strafing runs. The Nakajima, Kawasaki, and Mitsubishi plants, once the lifeblood of Japan's aviation industry, became routine targets for roving fighter squadrons. As losses mounted, the Imperial Command resorted to increasingly desperate measures. Experienced aviators like Warrant Officer Kenji Fujimoto resorted to suicidal ramming attacks against B-29 bombers, not purely from fanaticism, but from grim recognition that traditional tactics were useless. Against enemies who could fly halfway across the Pacific, outfight their interceptors, and still return home, there was no strategy left to rely on. By summer 1945, Japan's air defense network was collapsing. Mustang squadrons escorted bombers unchallenged over major cities, while others struck airfields and communication centers at will. The once mighty Imperial Air Force had been reduced to a scattered, desperate resistance. Historians later described those very long-range missions as one of the greatest technological and operational triumphs of the war. Military strategists still study them today as proof of how engineering innovation can alter the balance of power more decisively than numbers alone. Range had become a weapon in itself. Each gleaming P-51 that sliced through the sky over Tokyo that spring carried more than machine guns and bombs. It carried a new idea, that mobility and endurance could redefine warfare. The fighter had transcended its role as a tactical tool. It had become a strategic instrument capable of projecting power across oceans. The lesson reverberated far beyond 1945. Modern air forces from the Cold War to the present traced their doctrines of global reach and sustained aerial dominance to those pioneering Mustang flights. The age of the short-range interceptor was over. The era of the long-legged, multi-role fighter had begun. And yet, for all the statistics and analysis, the human element of that April morning remains unforgettable. In those fiery minutes above Tokyo, men like Masao Suenaga and Akira Watanabe confronted the impossible with courage and confusion. They were among the best pilots Japan had ever trained, but no skill could compensate for a revolution of science and industry. When people today see a P-51 Mustang gleaming in a museum or banking gracefully at an airshow, few imagine the shock it once inspired, the dread it brought to skies thought untouchable. Its polished aluminum skin reflected more than sunlight. It mirrored the end of an era and the birth of another. The Mustang proved that technological innovation can compress the world. It erased the oceans that had shielded nations and turned distance from defense into vulnerability. So when Captain Suenaga, moments before his death, asked over the radio, "How did they get here?" he was not merely questioning a flight path. He was articulating the moment humanity crossed a threshold. The P-51's arrival over Tokyo signaled that in the modern world there would be no such thing as out of reach. That morning's crimson sky became a prelude to Japan's surrender and to a new age of aviation in which endurance, speed, and power could coexist. The silver fighters that haunted Japanese pilots in 1945 did more than dominate the air, they redefined it. Today, their story endures as a reminder that revolutions are not always born from politics or ideology, but from the quiet hum of an engine, the curve of a wing, and the courage to make the impossible real. When you next look at a Mustang, imagine it not as a relic, but as the moment the world's horizons shrank forever, a machine that turned the skies above Tokyo into the stage of history's greatest leap in air power. And perhaps, echoing across time, you'll still hear that question from a dying pilot's lips: how did they get here? Because the answer to that question didn't just change a war. It changed the world.